A hospital administrator stood in the middle of her own facility's pediatric wing and offered $50,000 in private consulting fees to anyone at all, who could get through to the boy in room 14. Neurologists had tried. Behavioral specialists flown in from Johns Hopkins had tried. A row of the most credentialed child psychologists in the state of Georgia stood in that corridor, clipboards in hand, and not one of them could reach him. The boy was 9 years old, nonverbal, and had not eaten in 31 hours. And then the security guard, the man who checked badges at the entrance every morning, the one nobody in that building knew by name, the one who had worked the overnight shift for going on 3 years, set down his thermos and walked past all of them without a word. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He just pulled a chair to the side of that bed, sat down, and stayed. And after a while, he reached into his shirt pocket, unfolded a small piece of paper, and laid it flat on the mattress between them. And that boy, who hadn't moved in 2 days, reached out and touched it. But before I tell you what was on that paper, and before I tell you how a security guard could do in 20 minutes what $50,000 worth of specialists couldn't do in 3 days, I want to say something directly to you. If you have ever loved somebody the world doesn't know how to love, somebody it calls difficult, or unreachable, or too far gone, then stay with me. Because this story is for you, and the ones you love, that's all I'll ask. Now let me tell you about the man in that chair. His name is Denzel Washington, not the actor. A different man entirely, though if you knew him, you'd understand why he finds the coincidence more amusing than anything else. He is 53 years old. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta, off Jonesboro Road, in a building where the mailboxes jam and the parking lot floods when it rains hard. He drives a 2009 Ford F-150 with 212,000 miles on it. He has a coffee mug from a diner in Macon that closed 11 years ago, and he uses it every single morning without fail. He works security at Greystone Children's Medical Center on Peachtree Battle Avenue. 3rd shift only. Badge check, lobby rounds, the occasional escort for a parent who's been there too many hours and needs someone to walk them to their car without making them feel like they've failed. It is invisible work. He knows this. You only know he exists when something goes wrong, and he has made his peace with that, mostly because he learned a long time ago that being invisible and being unimportant are not the same thing at all. He is a single father. And to understand what happened in room 14 on that Thursday in November, you have to understand his son. Because his son is the reason he could do what he did. His son is the reason he would have done it for free, and did. His boy's name is Marcus. He is 24 now. He works at a shipping warehouse in Decatur, sorting and organizing inventory, and he is, by every account of everyone who works with him, the best they have ever seen at that particular job. His particular mind, precise, pattern-driven, exquisitely attuned to order, makes him extraordinary at it. He has a small apartment. He has a routine he guards carefully. He has a life that is his own. But when Marcus was small, none of that was visible. None of it was imaginable. Marcus was nonverbal until he was nearly 10. Profoundly autistic, the doctors said, in those flat clinical words that tell you everything about a diagnosis and nothing about a child. When Marcus was little, the world looked at him and saw a problem. A boy who screamed in grocery stores. A boy who couldn't bear to be touched on certain days and needed deep pressure on others. A boy who lined his shoes up at the exact same angle every single morning and came apart completely if someone moved them even slightly. The world saw something that needed fixing. Denzel saw his son. A whole person, a complete person. A person who happened to experience the world turned all the way up, like a radio someone had cranked to a volume everyone else found unbearable, and Marcus just lived there, in that volume, every hour of every day. He wasn't broken. He was overwhelmed, almost constantly, by a world that had been built for people who weren't wired the way he was. And the screaming that strangers called a tantrum was not Marcus being bad. It was Marcus drowning and trying to say so in the only language he had. It took Denzel years to learn that language. Years? Marcus's mother, Patricia, good woman, strong woman, a woman who loved that boy with everything in her, she carried her half of it as long as she could. The weight of it. The sleepless years, the stares in public, the relatives who whispered about discipline, the grief for the ordinary life they'd both quietly pictured. It wore her down. She left when Marcus was 9, not because she stopped loving him, but because she had come to the end of what she could carry. Denzel does not say a word against her. He never has. He knows what that weight does to people. He carried it alone after she left, and there were nights, real nights, bad nights, when he almost didn't make it through to the morning. There was one night in particular. Marcus was maybe 6. He had been in crisis for nearly 2 hours. Denzel had tried everything he knew, which at that point was very little. He'd held him, and that made it worse. He'd talked to him, and that made it worse. He'd tried music, tried dim light, tried the weighted blanket they'd been given by a therapist, who meant well, but didn't quite understand. And then, at some point past midnight, Denzel just stopped, not because he gave up, because he had nothing left. He slid down the wall beside the kitchen counter and sat on the cold linoleum floor, and he went completely still and completely quiet, and he stayed that way. And after a few minutes, Marcus crawled across the kitchen floor and pressed his back against his father's arm. Not a hug. He couldn't do hugs then. Just his back against his father's arm. And he went quiet too. Denzel sat there on that floor until nearly 2 in the morning, and he cried, and he did not fully understand why he was crying until much later. He was crying because he had spent 6 years trying to pull his son out of the water, and his son had never needed to be pulled out. He had needed his father to get in, to stop thrashing, to be still, to be the one fixed, reliable, unmoving thing in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. That was the night Denzel started learning his son's language. It cost him his certainty to learn it. That's probably why it stuck. He didn't learn it in a book, though he read plenty of them. He learned it by staying, by getting things wrong and then getting them less wrong, by paying attention to what his son's body told him when his son's voice could not. He learned that the screaming was information. He learned that you do not calm a flooding child by adding more noise, more movement, more people, more please, buddy, please. You calm a flooding child by taking away, by getting low, by becoming still, by making yourself the quietest, most predictable thing in the room until the room stops being so terrifying. He learned, in other words, to be a calm place. That is the only skill he has ever claimed. He paid for it with 15 years of his life, and he would not trade it for anything with a frame on it. So, the hospital. Greystone Children's Medical Center is the kind of place that takes your breath away a little the first time you walk in. 7 floors of gleaming glass and the particular hush of serious medicine. The lobby smells like disinfectant and the coffee from the cart near the entrance, and every surface is the kind of clean that takes real invisible effort to maintain. Denzel had worked there for 3 years and 2 months when this happened. He knew the building the way you know a place when you've walked its corridors at 3 a.m. enough times. The elevator that sticks on the 4th floor, the East Wing nurses' station that always has coffee going, the chapel on the 2nd floor where parents sat when they didn't know what else to do. He knew the overnight charge nurses by first name. He knew which residents were burning out and which ones still had that particular quality of full presence that medicine eventually trains out of people. He knew the people who cleaned the floors and the people whose names were on the buildings. And to the people whose names were on the buildings, he was part of the scenery. He understood this. He had made his peace. The administrator of Greystone, the one who had put out the offer of $50,000, was a woman named Catherine Harwell. 47 years old, Stanford MBA, had been running the hospital's operations for 6 years. She had done real things, built real systems, raised real money. The kind of person who had worked so hard for so long that her competence had curdled, somewhere along the way, into a certainty that she was the smartest person in any room she entered. She was not a cruel woman. That is the thing about this story that I want you to hold on to, because it is the thing that makes it true rather than simple. She was not a cruel woman. She had a framed photo on her desk of the groundbreaking ceremony for the new oncology wing, the one she'd spent 4 years fundraising for. She gave generously to a literacy program in Vine City. She believed sincerely that she was good at her job. She was, in the specific technical sense, often right. She was also the kind of person who had not, in a very long time, truly seen the people who worked below her. Not out of malice, out of habit, out of the particular blindness that comes from years of being deferred to. She knew Denzel the way she knew the elevators. as something that was supposed to work and that she only thought about when it didn't. His name, if asked, she might have guessed wrong. She would not have been embarrassed by that. She would have considered it, in some quiet corner of herself, reasonable. The boy in room 14 was named Thomas. He was 9 years old, nonverbal, and had been admitted after a severe meltdown at school that had resulted in injuries to Thomas from restraint. His mother, a woman named Beverly Alcott, a dental hygienist from Marietta, had been in that room for 2 days. She had not slept. She had not eaten enough. She sat in the chair by her son's bed, and she watched the specialists come and go, and she watched her boy stare at the ceiling, and she held herself very still, the way people hold themselves when they are afraid that if they move, they will break. The specialists meant well. They were good at their jobs, most of them. But they came in with their clipboards and their protocols and their professional calm. And Thomas would feel them coming before they reached the door. The particular energy of someone who intends to fix something. And he would lock. Every muscle in his body would go rigid, and he would turn his face to the wall, and he would not come back for hours. By the second day, Catherine Harwell was on the floor personally, which was unusual, and it was in this context that she made her offer. $50,000. To any consultant, any specialist, anyone with credentials and a methodology and a solution. She said it in the corridor at 4:17 p.m. on a Wednesday, in front of 3 department heads, 2 senior nurses, and a resident who had been on shift for 19 hours. She said it with the brisk certainty of a person who believes that every problem has a price, and that the right price, applied correctly, will solve it. Denzel was at the end of the corridor. He had come up to check on a noise complaint from a family 2 rooms down, a monitor alarm that kept misfiring. He heard her say it. He stood there for a moment with his thermos in his hand, and he looked at the door to room 14, and he thought about Marcus at age 6 on a kitchen floor. He thought about the feeling of a small back pressing against his arm in the dark, and then he walked toward the door. He did not ask permission. He did not announce himself. He was aware in a specific and practical way that neither of these things would go well for him if he tried. So he simply moved the way he had learned to move around his son, quietly, without urgency, without the particular energy that locks a child down. He pushed open the door to room 14, and he stepped inside, and he let the door close softly behind him. The room was dim. Beverly Alcott looked up from her chair with the particular expression of a woman who has been dealing with professionals for 2 days and has run completely out of hope for any of them. Denzel looked at her and nodded once, and then he looked at the boy on the bed. Thomas was on his side facing the wall. His hands were over his ears. His shoulders were pulled up so far they were nearly touching his jawline. Denzel did not go to the bed. He pulled the visitor's chair from the corner of the room, not the chair beside the bed, the one farther away, and he sat down. He set his thermos on the floor. He did not speak. He did not look at Thomas directly. He just sat. And he breathed. The slow, deliberate breathing he had learned at midnight on a kitchen floor 15 years ago. The breathing that says, without any words at all, "There is nothing to be afraid of in this room. I am not here to fix anything. I am just here." Beverly watched him. She said nothing, partly because she had nothing left to say, and partly because something in the quality of his stillness made her own breathing slow down a fraction. Outside in the corridor, she could hear Catherine Harwell's voice, crisp and efficient, talking to someone about care protocols. In room 14, there was only quiet. Denzel sat. Thomas lay with his back to the room. Time passed in the particular slow way time passes in hospitals at night. At the 11-minute mark, Beverly counted because she had nothing else to do. Thomas's shoulders came down. Just slightly. Just enough. And then, a few minutes later, he turned over. Not toward Denzel. Just onto his back, which was different from where he'd been. Denzel did not react, did not lean forward, did not smile with the performative encouragement of someone who believes they are making progress. He just stayed where he was, in the same chair, at the same angle, with the same quality of stillness. It was then that he reached into his shirt pocket. He took out a small folded piece of paper, the kind that gets soft at the edges from being folded and folded many times, and he opened it carefully and laid it flat on the mattress beside Thomas. Not handed it to him. Just placed it there. The way you place something on a table for someone who might want it. Without pressure, without expectation. And then he folded his hands in his lap and looked at the window. Beverly craned to see what was on the paper. It was a drawing, simple, a little rough, done in pencil. A sun with uneven rays, a house with a crooked chimney. And beside the house, two figures, one taller, one smaller, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. The smaller figure had its hand raised toward the sun. That was all. Nothing written on it. Just the drawing. Thomas looked at the ceiling for another long moment. And then, slowly, the way a tide comes in. So gradually you can't point to the exact moment it happened. He turned his head. He looked at the paper. His hands came down from his ears, and he reached out one finger and touched the sun. Denzel did not move, but Beverly Alcott put both hands over her mouth. Outside in the corridor, Catherine Harwell was still talking. She did not know, yet, what was happening in room 14. She would know soon enough. But right now, in this room, a boy who had not eaten in 31 hours looked at a drawing on a piece of soft paper, and something in him recognized it, and something in him came back. By the time Catherine Harwell pushed open the door to check on progress, she opened it the way people open doors when they are accustomed to answers, with a small, sharp efficiency. Thomas was sitting up. He was not speaking. He was holding the piece of paper in both hands, studying the drawing, and the security guard was sitting in a chair 6 feet away, watching the window, not making a sound. Catherine took in the scene. She looked at Denzel. He was wearing his gray uniform, his badge on his chest, the one that said Greystone in letters just large enough to read. She looked at him the way you look at a piece of furniture that has moved on its own. Not anger, exactly. Something more reflexive. A recalibration of the room's hierarchy that her mind was not yet willing to complete. "Who authorized you to be in here?" she said. Her voice was low, controlled, the particular tone of someone who does not raise their voice because they have never needed to. Beverly Alcott looked up. Something changed in her face. "He did," Beverly said quietly. "I let him in." Catherine's gaze moved from Beverly back to Denzel. Denzel stood up, unhurried. He picked up his thermos from the floor. He looked at Catherine the way he looked at everyone. Directly, without challenge, without performance, with the simple steadiness of a person who is comfortable in their own skin. "He needs soft food when he's ready," Denzel said. Not to Catherine, to Beverly. "Avoid the overhead light when you can. The one by the window is better. And if someone needs to come in for any reason, knock twice and wait before you open the door. Give him that." He nodded to Beverly, who nodded back, and then he walked toward the door. Catherine stepped slightly into his path. Not blocking him, but not entirely out of the way either. "I asked you a question," she said. Denzel looked at her. "I know," he said, and he stepped around her and walked out into the corridor. Catherine stood in the doorway of room 14 for a moment. On the bed, Thomas was tracing the outline of the sun on the paper with one finger, very carefully, over and over. He did not look up. She stood there, and the corridor was busy around her, and nobody met her eyes, and after a moment she turned and followed Denzel out. She found him at the elevator bank, waiting. His hands were at his sides. He looked at the elevator doors. She walked toward him with the particular stride of someone who has decided that something is going to be addressed. "I don't know what you think you were doing in there," she said, "but you are a security guard. That is a patient room. You had no clinical authorization, no qualifications." "No, he's eating," said a voice behind her. It was Janet Osei, the pediatric charge nurse on duty. She had come around the corner from the nurse's station. She was holding a tablet, and she was looking at Catherine with the very careful expression of a woman who has opinions she has chosen, for the moment, not to fully express. "The aide just texted me. Thomas is eating. He asked for crackers." Catherine turned. She looked at Janet. She looked back at Denzel, who was still looking at the elevator doors. "That doesn't change the protocol," Catherine said. "He was not authorized to enter that room." Janet said nothing. The elevator arrived. Denzel stepped in. Before the doors closed, Catherine said, "I'll need to speak with your supervisor. This kind of unauthorized action is a liability issue." Denzel looked at her through the closing gap of the elevator doors. He did not look angry. He did not look afraid. He looked the way people look when they have heard something they understand and have decided how to carry it. The doors closed. Catherine turned back to the corridor. Janet was still standing there. "He has a son," Janet said. "Autistic. Grown now." Denzel raised him alone. Catherine looked at her. Is that supposed to be relevant? Janet looked at her for one long moment. I just thought you'd want to know, she said. And she walked back to her station. This is the part of the story where most people think the telling is almost over. The boy ate. The guard did something remarkable. Lesson learned. Everyone goes home. But that's not what happened. And what happened next is the reason I'm telling you this at all. Catherine Harwell filed the incident report that afternoon. She did it correctly, the way she did everything, with precise language and documented procedure. Unauthorized entry to a patient room by non-clinical staff. Potential HIPAA exposure. Recommendation, formal review, possible termination. She sent it to the head of HR and to the hospital's legal counsel and to the chief medical officer, a man named Dr. Raymond Pruitt, who had been at Greystone for 11 years. She also sent it to the head of the security contractor, a company called Meridian Protective Services, which held the contract with Greystone, with a note suggesting that Denzel Washington be reassigned away from patient areas. The report was thorough, it was professional, it was by every technical measure correct, and it was seen by the right people. The problem, for Catherine, was what those people knew that she did not. Dr. Raymond Pruitt read the incident report at his desk on a Thursday morning. He read it twice. Then he picked up his phone and he made a call, not to legal, not to HR. He called a man named Gerald Whitfield, who sat on the hospital's board of directors, and who had, for the past 7 years, been the anonymous primary donor to something called the Compass Foundation. The Compass Foundation funded, among other things, a network of family support centers for parents of autistic children across the southeastern United States. 12 centers in 6 states. It also happened to fund, quietly, without any public naming, Greystone Children's Medical Center's entire sensory integration therapy program. The one that had launched 3 years ago. The one that had treated 431 children in its first 2 years and was considered, in pediatric circles, one of the most effective programs of its kind in the country. Gerald Whitfield listened to Dr. Pruitt describe the incident report, and then he said, "Ray, I'm going to need you to hold on that." And he called the other members of the board. Denzel did not know any of this was happening. He came in for his Thursday night shift the same way he always came in. Same F-150 in the same parking space, same thermos from the same diner mug he'd washed that morning. He checked his badge, did his lobby round, said hello to the overnight desk clerk, a young woman named Sophie who was studying for her nursing boards and who always had a textbook open beside her monitor. He was on his second loop of the ground floor at 9:43 p.m. when Janet Osei found him. She was still in her street clothes. She'd gone home and come back, which was not nothing. She walked toward him in the corridor with the particular stride of someone carrying news. "They're meeting tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "Pruitt and the board. About you." Denzel looked at her. "Okay," he said. "You should know what's on that report," Janet said. "It recommends you be let go." Denzel looked at her for a moment. He nodded once. "Okay," he said again. Janet stared at him. "That's it? Okay?" He looked down the corridor, the East Wing nurses' station, the one that always had coffee going. The elevator that stuck on the 4th floor. The chapel on the 2nd level, where parents sat when they had nowhere else to be. "I did what I did," he said. "I'd do it again. If they let me go for that, then I'll go." Janet stood there. She had something she wanted to say. She didn't say it. She said instead, "Beverly Alcott asked for you today." "For Thomas." She asked if you could come by again before his discharge. Denzel's face changed then. Not much. The way a window changes when a cloud moves, and then it settled back. "Tell her I'll stop by before my shift ends," he said. Janet nodded. She started to turn, then she stopped. "The drawing," she said, "on the paper you gave him. What was it?" "Something my son drew," Denzel said, "when he was about Thomas's age." He didn't say anything else. He went back to his rounds. The board meeting was at 8 a.m. on Friday. Catherine Harwell arrived at 7:51 with printed copies of the incident report and a 1-page summary of the liability concerns. She was precise. She was prepared. She was, in the specific way she understood these things, right. She sat down at the table in the 5th floor conference room, and she laid her materials in front of her, and she waited for the board to confirm what she had already determined. Gerald Whitfield arrived at 8:03. He was 71 years old, retired now from 30 years in private equity, and he had the manner of a man who had stopped being impressed by most things sometime in his late 50s. He sat down across from Catherine, and he looked at the incident report she had prepared, and he looked at her. "Tell me what you know about the Compass Foundation," he said. Catherine looked at him. "I'm not sure how that's relevant to the security protocol issue," she said. Gerald placed a folder on the table. Inside it was a document, a 12-page summary of the Compass Foundation's giving history, its program outcomes, and a single page at the back that listed the Foundation's trustees. At the top of that page, under a heading that said Founding Trustee and Decremery d'Honneur, was a name. Catherine read the name. She read it again. The room was very quiet. Dr. Pruitt, who was sitting to her left, did not look at her. He looked at his hands. "The Sensory Integration Program," Gerald said. "The one on the 3rd floor. The one that's treated over 400 children. The one your hospital uses as a case study in every funding presentation you make to donors. The one that is, according to the last external review, the primary reason 3 major pediatric search grants chose Greystone over competing institutions." He paused. "That program exists because of one man. One man who built the Compass Foundation over 18 years, who funded it initially with money he earned, who designed its family training curriculum based on what he learned raising his son." Catherine looked at the document in front of her. The name at the top of the page was Denzel Washington. Not the actor, this man. The one with the gray uniform and the badge that said Greystone Sikik, and the thermos from a diner that had been closed for 11 years. "He works here," Dr. Pruitt said quietly, "because he wanted to be close to the work. Because he said there was something useful about being at ground level. About being in the building when things happened, rather than in a meeting room 3 floors above it." Catherine did not speak. "He has never told any member of this staff who he is," Gerald continued. "He has never used his connection to this institution to influence any decision. He asked, when he took the position, that no one on staff be informed. He wanted to work. That's all." The room was very still. Somewhere outside the window, Atlanta was already moving. The I-285 traffic, and the MARTA trains, and the ordinary, relentless motion of a city that doesn't stop for anyone's reckoning. Inside the conference room, Catherine Harwell sat very still with a piece of paper in her hands. "What do you want to do with the incident report?" Gerald asked. His voice was neutral. He was not gloating. He was not performing. He was asking a question, the way people ask questions when they already know the answer matters to the person being asked. Catherine set the report down. She looked at the window. Her coffee was in front of her, untouched and gone cold. "I want to withdraw it," she said. Her voice was steady. That at least she still had. "Done," said Gerald. Then he said, "I'd also like to recommend that we revisit the protocol for patient room access in cases of acute behavioral crisis. There's a gap there. A security staff member with specialized knowledge should have a pathway to assist clinical staff in those situations. Not as a workaround, as a recognized documented resource." He looked at Catherine. "Would you be willing to lead that review?" The question was generous, more generous than she had been. She knew it. She said yes. What happened next happened slowly, which is how things that actually change something usually happen. The protocol was rewritten. It took 4 months and 7 drafts and 2 consultations with the Compass Foundation's curriculum team, and when it was finished, it was good. It acknowledged something that the old protocol had simply never made room for. That knowledge doesn't only come with credentials, and that the person best positioned to help in a given moment is not always the person with the longest title. Catherine Harwell led the review. She did it carefully. She did it without fanfare. She visited 2 of the Compass Foundation's support centers, and she sat in on parent training sessions, and she watched families learn the things that Denzel had learned on a kitchen floor at midnight. And something shifted in her. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the way light shifts in a room when someone opens a window they've kept closed for a long time. She did not become a different person. That is not how this works. But she became someone who paused before she filed a report. Someone who asked the question she should have asked in that corridor, not who authorized you, but what do you know, and how can we make room for it? That change cost her something. The board, following the investigation, issued a formal rebuke of her handling of the incident. Not enough to remove her, but enough to be on record. Her contract renewal, which had been considered automatic, was made conditional on a performance review. She had built real things. She had done real work. And she had also, in one corridor, tried to silence something true because it didn't fit the shape she expected knowledge to take. Both things were real. Both things counted. The story doesn't resolve that cleanly because nothing real does. Denzel was asked, afterward, if he wanted anything acknowledged publicly. Any credit, any announcement, any formal recognition. He thought about it for longer than the question seemed to warrant. Then he said no. He said, "The work is the thing, not recognition." He said, "There are parents out there right now on kitchen floors learning their children the hard way, with no support and no language for what they're doing, and they need something more than a story about a man who got thanked at a board meeting." He said, "If you want to do something, build more of what we've already built. Make it free. Make it findable. Make it so that the next family that walks through the door doesn't have to start from zero the way I did." Gerald Whitfield told him that the Compass Foundation had recently received a significant new gift. He did not specify the amount or the source, and that 2 new centers were already in development. One in Birmingham, one in Savannah. Denzel nodded at this. He picked up his thermos from the conference room table. He said good, and he took the elevator back to the ground floor and finished his shift. Thomas Alcott was discharged on a Saturday. Beverly had arranged for him to come back to the Compass Foundation's Atlanta Center, the one on Flat Shoals Avenue, for family support sessions. She had been given a copy of the family curriculum, the one Denzel had helped design, though she didn't know that at the time. She asked, before they left, if she could speak to the security guard who had sat with her son. She didn't know his name. She had not known it the whole time. Someone found Denzel. He was in the east stairwell, doing a check on a fire door sensor that had been throwing false alerts for a week. He came down and he stood in the lobby, and Beverly walked toward him with Thomas beside her. Thomas holding the piece of paper, still soft, still folded, in both hands. Beverly said, "I don't know how to thank you." Denzel looked at Thomas. Thomas was looking at the lobby floor, which had a particular geometric pattern in the tiles. Diamonds inside squares, repeating out to the walls. "You don't need to," Denzel said. Beverly reached out and she took his hand in both of hers, and she held it for a moment without saying anything, and then she let go. Thomas looked up from the tile pattern. He looked at Denzel. He held out the piece of paper. Denzel looked at it. He looked at Thomas. He shook his head slowly and said quietly, "You keep it." Thomas looked at the paper. He folded it carefully along its existing creases and put it back in his pocket, next to his heart. And then they walked out through the lobby doors and into the Atlanta morning. Denzel stood there for a moment after they left. The lobby was doing what lobbies do at 9 on a Saturday. The quiet shift change, a family arriving at the front desk, the coffee cart being restocked, Sophie at the overhead desk packing up her nursing textbooks and pulling on her jacket. Ordinary, all of it ordinary, and important, all of it important. He picked up his thermos and he went back to work. That evening he called Marcus. His boy who has words now, his own careful words, each one a thing of value because each one was earned. He told him about Thomas, about the paper, about the lobby. Marcus was quiet on the line for a moment, the way he is. And then he said, in his particular way, he saw the sun, Dad. 3 words. Denzel had to pull his truck to the side of Jonesboro Road because his eyes weren't working right. He sat there for a minute with the engine running and the Atlanta night outside the windshield. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "He saw it. You taught me how to show it to him." Marcus was quiet again. Then he said, "Come for dinner Sunday." Denzel smiled. Not the performance of a smile, but the real thing. The kind that gets into the lines around the eyes and stays there. "I'll be there," he said. He pulled back into traffic. On the passenger seat, between his thermos and a folded road atlas he'd had for 20 years, there was a photograph. Small, worn at the corners. A woman holding a baby, squinting into the sun. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't need to. But it's there every day on that seat, in the truck, with 200,000 miles on it, and it goes where he goes. Now here is the thing I want to leave you with. A conference room full of board members and administrators looked at a man in a gray uniform and saw a liability. A staffing problem. An unauthorized entry in a report filed in triplicate, and one boy on a hospital bed looked at a drawing. A son, a crooked house, two figures with their shoulders touching, and saw exactly what it was. An outstretched hand. From someone who understood. Because he had spent 20 years learning to understand. Not in a classroom. Not with a credential. In a kitchen, on a floor, at midnight, in the dark, getting things wrong until he got them right. There are rooms full of expensive expertise in this world. And then there are people who paid for their knowledge with something that can't be reimbursed. And the question this story keeps asking me, the one I can't shake, is this: how many Thomas Alcotts are in rooms right now, turned toward the wall, waiting for one person to come in and sit down and be still? And how many people who could do that, who carry exactly that knowledge in their hands, are standing in corridors because no one thought to ask what they know? Catherine Harwell is still at Greystone. The new protocol is in its second year. She reviews it quarterly. She has not, in anyone's memory, filed a report without first walking down to the floor and talking to the people involved. It is a small change, it is not nothing. The Compass Foundation opened its Birmingham Center on a Thursday in March. The ribbon cutting was attended by families, by therapists, by the kind of people who drive an hour on a weekday to be in a room that finally understands their child. There was no press. There was no ceremony. There was a wall near the entrance, and on it were photographs of children. Particular, beautiful, specific children who the world had called difficult. And beneath the photographs, someone had painted 4 words in plain black letters. Not broken. Just reaching. Denzel was there. He stood in the parking lot for a while first, the way he always does with the centers, because he knows what it's going to do to him when he goes in. And then he went in. He walked past the photographs. He read the words. He stood there for a minute with his thermos in his hand, in a building that existed because of a kitchen floor and a promise he'd made to 2 people, one living, one gone, that he would learn his son all the way down. No matter how long it took. He walked through the rooms, soft light, quiet corners, staff being taught to get low and get quiet and listen before they try to fix anything. He stopped in the training room, where a young couple, couldn't have been more than 30, both of them, were sitting across from a facilitator, and the woman was crying, not with despair but with the specific relief of someone who has just been told, for the first time, that they are not doing it wrong, that their child is not broken, that there is a language and it can be learned, and they are already learning it. Denzel did not introduce himself. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he stepped back into the hallway. Because this was not his moment. This was theirs. That is the whole thing, right there. You spend 20 years learning something the hardest possible way, and then, if you're lucky, if you make the right choices, if you keep the promise, if you stay, it stops being only yours. It goes out into the world and finds the people who need it. And it does things you will never be able to track. Things you will never be able to name. Things that started on a kitchen floor at midnight, with a man who stopped trying to fix his son long enough to actually hear him. That is the investment nobody tells you about. The one with no paperwork, no prospectus, no guaranteed return. The one that pays in the currency that outlasts everything else. So let me ask you something, before you go. There was a corridor in that hospital, and in that corridor there were people with every credential this country offers, and every tool that money could purchase. And none of them could do what one man in a gray uniform did in 20 minutes, with a piece of paper his son had drawn when he was 9 years old. Not because he was lucky. Not because he had a gift. Because he had paid attention, for 20 years, to something everyone else had given up on understanding. So here is what I honestly want to know from you. Is there someone in your life, someone the world calls unreachable, or difficult, or too much? Who you have come to understand is simply speaking a language that nobody around them has taken the time to learn. Tell me about them in the comments. Tell me their name. I read every single one, and I would be honored to know. And if this story reached you, if you believe, the way I've come to believe, that nobody is broken, that some people are just waiting for one other person to get quiet and listen, then do me that one favor. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a like so the next person finds their way here. And leave your story below. I'll see you in the next one, trust me. It's a good one.